vivid purple chef's coat. Raghavan, I'm so glad we can do this. Thanks for doing key three.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I love being with you, Lynn.
So what are your key three dishes?
One is a dal, which is a legume-based curry. We're doing a spiced rice, and we're doing a cabbage slaw.
Which one do you want to begin with?
We'll start with dal. And the kind of dal we're doing today is done with yellow split peas. The variety of yellow split peas in India is slightly different, but it looks very similar to the variety that you find here. And we call it chana dal in India, which is actually black garbanzo beans that have been split and the skins have been removed.
And these are the size of tiny peas, but they're really a beautiful yellow color. You know, I'm looking at everything you have laid out here, and the colors are vibrant. And one of the things I think that's so appealing about this cuisine is not only that there are endless varieties of taste, but it's beautiful to look at.
You've hit the nail on the head. With Indian food, to me, it's all about colors, its textures, its aromas, its temperatures. And so you eat with all your senses, but I've had people say, oh, Indian food, you know, it's all yellow, it's all the same.
It's all curry powder.
Yeah, and, you know, first of all, curry powder ain't Indian food.
Right.
And second of all, you know, to me, the beauty of Indian food is creating that complexity with really not a bajillion spices, but maybe just one or two spices treated in such a way that you're going to end up with a complexity that just blows your mind.
Wow. Let's get to making dal.
We'll get to making dal. So what I've done so far is I have washed the peas, and then I will go ahead and start, I'm just adding water to it. No broth. And oftentimes people say, well, why are you doing that without broth? Because if you think about it, the diva in Indian cooking really are the spices. And so cluttering it with things like broth and so on, you really don't need that because the spices really shine. And that's what I want to prove in this dish is, first of all, the simplicity of it, 10 ingredients or less. And it is about going to the main grocery stores and just getting what it is that we're familiar with, potatoes, onions, chilies, cilantro, and so on. And so you look at one spice in point, which is ground turmeric.
And it's that gorgeous, gorgeous yellow color.
You know, students in the past, they'll go, curry. I said, not. I said, this is ground turmeric that gives commercial curry powders that notorious yellow color.
Is it true that curry powder originated when the British came back to England?
400 years ago, when the English were in India, they fell in love with some of the sauces in the southeast and the northwest, and they had their cooks put together a cornucopia of ingredients that they ground and put them in a jar and labeled it as curry powder. But as a concept, you do not have curry powders in India. To us, in a nutshell, if it doesn't have a sauce, it's not a curry. And not all curries have turmeric in it either. And so, in essence, a dal to us is a legume curry. Is what it boils down
because
to.
It's saucy.
Because it's saucy.
Okay.
Just like you and me.
Okay, so we've got about half a teaspoon, and we're not really measuring.
No, and so in this dish, you know, we've got the turmeric in here, and that actually will continue to cook and add color and flavor to the peas. It'll come to a boil, and then we're going to get some of the foam that sort of separates naturally as part of the cooking process. So once we get some of that foam out, this is where we're now going to...
Why are you doing that?
Because it creates a sauce that is a little bit clearer.
Okay.
Plus, you know, I mean, one of the school of thoughts is that, you know, it helps you digest it much better, which is, you know, when talking to some of the food scientists, that certainly could be debatable. Now, we're going to go ahead and add some potatoes.
And they're diced about
about half an inch.
Half-inch little cubes. Yeah.
And so we're going to now just let that continue to simmer, and we're going to do that covered, and that will cook the potatoes. But while that is doing its thing, we're going to now look at building the flavors in this pot. And into this dish, all we're going to do is add 3 spices, and one is cumin seed. I always say buy spices as much as possible in the entire seed form, because you give whole spices to a good Indian cook, he or she should be able to extract 8 flavors from a given spice, depending on what you do with it. So when it's used raw, as is in the seed form, you get 1 flavor. If it's ground raw, you get a 2nd flavor. If it's dry toasted, which is what we're going to do, left in the seed form, flavor number 3. If it's ground after it has been dry toasted, flavor number 4. If it's sautéed in some kind of a fat, Left in the seed form, you get flavor number 5. If it's ground after it has been sautéed, flavor number 6. If it's soaked in some kind of a liquid used in the seed form, flavor number 7. If it's ground after it has been soaked in the liquid, flavor number 8.
Okay.
And you think about that. You change the liquid, you change the flavor of the spice also. We're also going to we're going to add some coriander seeds. You need about a tablespoon.
They always have an orangey overtone, or is it my imagination?
It's actually a distant member of the citrus family, and so when you grind it intensifies its citrus quality.
Okay, so you've chosen these 2 spices, the coriander and the cumin. What's next?
We're adding some chilies to this, and these are whole chilies.
Oh, these are small, dried red chilies. And if I remember, the smaller the chili, the hotter the chili.
Yes, and we're going to go ahead and toast these. My pan is now preheating, and so when the pan
so a
is
little fry pan.
You notice that there's no oil.
Yeah, that's right.
And so to this, we're going to add the whole spices. And when you're toasting spices, you're looking for the first color change, and you're looking for the first aroma change. You can hear that sizzle that is happening without the oil.
Oh, yes. And you have this over a medium.
Medium high, I would say. But you can see what's happened very
quickly.
Darkening.
They're darkening, yeah.
They have changed. This is all we're looking for right now.
That fast?
That fast. You can see the chilies have blackened.
Oh, yeah.
And so we're going to take this and we're going to add it right to a blender jar.
Okay.
And then to create a liquid base for that, we're going to add some tomatoes to it. And then we will puree all of that together.
You're really bringing it down to a very, there's tiny bits in there, but basically it's a puree.
But
oh my goodness. Oh, and the aroma, oh my. You can smell that lusciousness of the tomato.
There's a smokiness that comes through.
Oh gosh, yeah.
And so this is what's going to flavor our legume curry.
So this goes into...
Right into the pot. Once the potatoes are done, we are now adding this.
This is really beautiful because you have the bright yellow split peas, you've got the russet color of the tomato and the ground spice, and then you have flecks of fresh coriander. It's a gorgeous dish.
It is a gorgeous dish.
Can I taste it?
Yes, of course.
Okay, now this is beautiful. This is a stew-like consistency.
And this is what blankets rice.
Oh, my. Oh.
You're tasting the complexity that's coming through.
Oh, and I can get the spices. But you're right, they're all blended.
Mm-hmm. It's a marriage that really works very well with this dish.
Raghavan, this is just delicious. Thanks so much for doing Key3 with us.
Anytime.
Raghavan Iyer is the author of 660 Curries and the forthcoming Indian Cooking Unfolded. Now, you can hear the rest of our Key3 discussion, see the pictures we snapped as we recorded, and get the recipes for his 3 essential dishes: the smoky yellow split peas, the sweet scented pilaf, and Indian slaw. Everything's at splendidtable.org. Michael Pollan of the Omnivore's Dilemma fame, the man who challenges us to rethink how we eat, well, he's taken on a surprising project. He set out to learn to cook. His new book is Cooked, A Natural History of Transformation. After all his forays into the hows and the whys of our food systems, it dawned on him he really didn't cook. He more or less assembled with good food, but he believes that isn't what cooking is really about. Michael, it has been far too long. It's good to have you back.
Thank you. It's very good to be back.
So, Michael, one of the things you bring up in the book is that cooking does not have the same respectability, the same regard as literature does, or the arts, or the sciences. Why do you think that is?
Well, it's a good question. At other times it has been held in higher regard. I think it's been denigrated in our own time for a couple of reasons. One is that it has been women's work for a very long time. At least home cooking has. And the arbiters of prestige are very often men in this culture. So they didn't completely appreciate the wonders of cooking and the complexity of it. But another reason, I think, is that what I think of as the agro-industrial food system has deliberately denigrated cooking because corporations very much wanted to take over this work. And so you see this concerted campaign that goes, back 75 years, but really intensifies after World War II, with the food industry trying to persuade you that this is not a legitimate use of your time and that they would be very happy to do it for you and relieve you of the burden, long before anybody thought about cooking as a burden.
Yeah, but it's really interesting because I think, was it Laura Shapiro who did a book about that era?
Terrific book, yeah.
Yeah, it was Something from the Oven, I think it was called.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't she mention that in those days when women who worked at home, and many women did, the one thing they really enjoyed was cooking?
Exactly. There was an effort to kind of lump all housework together, but women said they liked cooking. Cooking was a creative outlet. But I think what happened, too, as women got busier and more women went into the workplace, something had to give. And we were at this very interesting, kind of post-Betty Friedan moment where there was a very uncomfortable conversation unfolding. Women were going back to work. Women's liberation was very much in the air. And there was tension over who would do the housework. It had to be renegotiated. And before that conversation could be completely played out and resolved, the food industry very self-consciously stepped in and said, we'll take care of it. We've got you covered. And they came forward with fast food and processed food. And it was a very deliberate effort on their part, in fact, to hitch their agenda to that of feminism. And there's a wonderful billboard that I can remember from the 70s. Kentucky Fried Chicken had this billboard all over the country, giant bucket of fried chicken with just 2 words above it, women's liberation. So that if you went down the path of using fast food, that was the progressive thing to do. So, it's that kind of campaign, I think, that really undermined home cooking. And it did it for, very good capitalist reasons. I've written about food for a long time, as you know, and I've gone back to the farm and forward to the, food processors. There's no money to be made in farming or selling simple food. All the money is in processing it. And it's no wonder now that, of your food dollar, something like 92% of it does not go to the farmer. It goes to processors and packagers and shippers and advertisers and marketers. So the way you make money is shrinking the amount that we spend on actual farm goods and getting us to let corporations cook for us.
One very striking thing you wrote was about the senses that cooking appeals to. Could you explain?
Yeah, one of the interesting things about Western culture is over time it has tended to devalue the physical senses and to elevate the eye and the ear to some extent. But the sense of taste, smell, and touch have been considered in the whole tradition of Western philosophy and literature to be lower and more feminine, by the way. It's definitely tied to a misogynistic streak. And cooking trafficked in those lower senses. It was stuff you could taste and smell, and that was more basic. The other problem with cooking in Western culture, of course, is Puritanism. We look down on those activities that both animals and us like to do. And eating is one, and sex, of course, is another. And so Puritanism had trouble with both those things because they were base and physical. And I think
but the most fun.
Yes, I know. Well, fun is a problem if you're a Puritan.
I guess it is, isn't it?
So much of our culture has been about this kind of sublimation of those senses, and cooking appeals very frankly to it, although we sometimes pretend otherwise. One of the things I talk about in the book is this wonderful euphemistic vocabulary around cheese. Now, cheese, appeals to some of the basest sensory desires. It smells like human bodies. And I finally found a cheesemaker who was willing to kind of admit that, yeah, this is part of what, a good stinky cheese is about. And Freud has written about the fact that we basically wanted to elevate ourselves above the animals. When we stood up, we were no longer on all fours sniffing the rear ends of things all over the world. We were standing up, and we privileged the eye and the ear at that point.
You talk about some of the imperatives of why to cook. And we know about the family around the dinner table, and I don't mean to shove that aside and say it's not important, but some of the other things you talk about really got to me.
Well, I think there are a lot of very good reasons to cook, well beyond the fact that it's really good for your health and your family's kind of psychological well-being, and it's very good for your social life to sit down with other people, and all this is kind of obvious. But I found that there were some other virtues. I think of cooking as a political act. I mean, I think we've kind of fallen into this place where we are so dependent on others to do everything for us. And that all we do is we take the one thing we do for a living, we sell that into the market, and we take that money and use that to outsource everything in our lives. And that leads to a kind of dependence that's almost infantilizing. There is something very satisfying in providing for yourself, even to some extent. And I would include gardening in that too.
Right, yeah.
You feel so much more competent, self-reliant, independent, when you know, hey, I could make a loaf of bread if I wanted to, if I needed to. So that's one thing that to me is very important. The other is our senses these days. We spend our lives in front of screens, and we have 5 senses, not just 2, not just the eye and the ear. And cooking re-employs your senses. And I think one of the reasons that some people are rediscovering cooking now is the fact that it is enormously satisfying to once again use your hands, to once again use your sense of smell and taste. And cooking is one of those rare activities that engages all 5 senses.
Michael, thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. Always a pleasure to talk to you.
Michael Pollan is author of Cooked, A Natural History of Transformation. Michael uses a pasta sauce to illustrate the art of the braise. So find his recipe, meat, sugo, and pasta, on the website, splendidtable.org. You stay with us. We're going to be back in a moment to talk with you and to check in with the actor who is taking on the food deserts of New Orleans. I'm Lynn Rossetto Casper. You're listening to The Splendid Table from APM, American Public Media.
Morning. Best time to get a jump on the news. Stories ripple through the day and beyond. Listen to WNYC first thing for the latest developments and in-depth reporting on what lies ahead. We'll unravel the issues and include you in the conversation. Be a morning person. It's never too late to start early. WNYC. Never turn it off.
14 dead in West Texas, a workplace time bomb.
You are not forgotten.